In October 2008, Dead Space was released. Dead Space is one of the best survival horror games ever made. Its intense gameplay, original monster design, and oppressive atmosphere quickly earned it a well-placed position amongst such games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil. A sequel was then released in 2011, which, while adding more action, kept the horror by keeping true to the original's formula and adding a more interesting and psychological story, quickly receiving high praise and arguments about which one is better. A third game also came out. It's not actually as bad as people say, it's definitely not as good as the first two, and leans too far into action, having shootouts now. It even sold well, but not well enough for some people, and after ending with a cliffhanger, the series was dead. Nearly a decade after that, the original creator of Dead Space, Glenn Schofield, opened Striking Distance Studio and announces a new game, a survival horror set in space. Not a direct sequel to the Dead Space games, it's heavily implied to be a spiritual successor with things like this in the trailer. Whether that's because of a true artistic desire to build on the foundations of a great game, or because people are more likely to buy something when it's connected to something they already like, you decide. Regardless, it worked, with people getting very excited for the game, helped by the fact that the Callisto Protocol is based off the original concept for Dead Space, with it being a prison escape set on a moon. You can actually find posters for this idea on the issue mirror. While the idea for the Callisto Protocol has been around since before Dead Space, and the marketing in game gives the impression of Dead Space, the game fails to capture what made Dead Space so great, with a boring combat system, unimaginative enemies, and a half-baked story, which altogether creates a deeply unscary experience. This video is basically going to be me explaining how CP is bad. Yeah, I really shouldn't abbreviate the Callisto Protocol. Part 1. Where's the threat? Most horror games have a similar arc when it comes to how much of a threat the enemies are to the player. It's why a lot of horror games end with much more action-focused gameplay, because usually, by the end of the game, you have better weaponry, know what you're fighting and how to fight them, so the game will throw more of them at you to keep the game exciting and keep up the threat. It's the satisfying arc of horror games, going from scared of one enemy attacking you to mowing down groups of that same enemy. How much of a threat the enemies are is directly tied to your first encounter with them. Most horror games follow the same script when building to this initial encounter. First, you see what impact the monster has had, then you see the monster itself. Dead Space has an incredible build up to its first encounter with the monster. The game starts with you on a repair mission after a mining ship has gone quiet. As you attempt to board, you're hit by some debris and crash land in the dock. The tension is now risen, your way off the ship is now broken, but this is fixable, just need to find the crew, leading to the big question, where is the crew? Searching for them, you find a damage report on the ship, showing that much more is wrong with the Ishimura than you originally thought. Before you can really ask what's happened, a quarantine is activated. The tension hits a peak, and before it can dissipate, something attacks. The first time you see a necromorph, it kills 2 of your crewmates, and your only option is to run away. How much more of a threat can you show the monster of your game is going to be? It murders your 2 most heavily armed co-workers, and the game screams at you to get the fuck out of there. You have no chance of fighting them. Just run away and pray they leave you alone. We see the effect the monster has had, the seemingly abandoned ship, the damage report, and then we see it, cutting through people, unfazed by the high-tech weaponry. 8 minutes into the game and the threat has been expertly set up. You are completely helpless and running for your life. Only after finding a cutting tool, and a helpful note, and then a recording, and then a told by one of the characters, and finally the game just telling you, right, I get it, shoot the limbs, you've taken what should have been a good piece of environmental storytelling and beaten me over the head with it. Now you can fight back, with your first fight being immediately after getting the plasma cutter. Even then, you still find it murdering someone before it goes for you. And getting a weapon doesn't mean you're safe now. The necromorphs aren't an easy fight. If you do shoot off a limb, it'll keep coming. Its only concern is killing you. It won't stop until you stop it. All of this opening was designed to build up the threat of the necromorphs. Your first experience with them perfectly explains why the ship has gone dark, where the crew went, and how much trouble you're in. The opening cinematic of the Callisto Protocol has someone walking through a street surrounded by dead bodies, where you get a jump scare. The game starts off fine, it doesn't really look like space zombies have ripped through the area, more like an airborne virus that causes people to choke or something. Why didn't they have the bodies be torn up and broken? Because they have that later on in the prison, but whatever. Important thing is we see the effect these things have had as they're able to destroy a city. Problem is, it's all downhill from here. After this cutscene, Jacob, the player character, gets a jump scare. and then has his ship boarded, and you have to sneak around the terrorists. I thought after this section that the game would be you sneaking around enemies at the start of the game until you get your hands on a weapon, compounded by the fact that you initially get a shank. The game was building up to sneaking around the enemies, taking them by surprise as they're too powerful to take head on at the start, but nope, after another happy landing, you're arrested by a prison guard and taken to Black Iron Prison. We then get a third jump scare during a dream sequence. That's 3 in about 17 minutes. Any tension this opening has managed to scrape together so far is immediately lost after these jump scares. Unless they're done very well, most jump scares release all the tension, so not only has the game failed to create any feeling of fear or tension, it's also lost what you'll soon see is its only attempt to make you feel scared, as the jump scares are already overused. The game now tries to add to the threat as we wake up. We wake up. The outbreak has as much effect on Jacob as a broken alarm clock. I know he just had the core implanted, but why wouldn't you have Jacob wake up as the outbreak is sweeping through the prison, with him trapped in his cell as the monsters rip apart guards outside? This would help advance the threat, as we first saw what they did, and now can see how they did it. You might be disagreeing with me, thinking that the opening of a horror game doesn't need to spend all its time setting up the threat of the monster, and I would agree with you. The Last of Us first sets up Joel and Sarah's relationship before introducing the threat, and interestingly does the opposite of Dead Space in the Callisto Protocol, where we first see the monster, then the effect of the monster. The threat is perfectly demonstrated as we see the outbreak in progress, as we see how far the world has fallen overnight, with houses on fire, people getting killed in front of us, but also shows how far the world is going to fall as this father holding his injured daughter are fired upon by the very people meant to save them. This perfectly sets up the threat of the world, showing that the infection has spread so quickly that there are already hordes of them, but also that the danger of them has made humans so desperate they're willing to murder entire families to eliminate any chance of them getting infected. So while Dead Space masterfully weaves the threat into the narrative, it's not 100% necessary. The Callisto Protocol does set up some other plot threads. I do like how when you're searching your ship, there's an animation of Jacob checking some crates that come up later. That does begin to make the player ask why he paid particular attention to those specific boxes, but it never advances the threat. We already know it can decimate our population, so when the prison is taken over, but we don't see anything, the threat level has remained the same. Unfortunately, any threat the game has built so far is lost the first time you encounter the biophage. While searching for a way to open the cell for the guy who gives you the shiv, you'll find these prisoners beating up someone when they attack you. This is how the game teaches you how the combat is going to work. Now, I've had to rewrite this section because when I first played the game, I thought these guys were beating up a biophage, and I was going to make the point that how we're supposed to be scared of the biophage when the first time we see them is getting beaten up. But while looking at the scene in my editing software, I'm not actually sure anymore, so I'm going to walk you through the scene and you can make up your own mind. When entering the room, you can see this prisoner in the grey shirt being attacked and falls to the side when his attacker comes after you. You can still see him briefly during the fight here, but the next time the camera shows that part of the room, he's gone, and after taking care of the last prisoner, a biophage is just in the room, attacking a third person that wasn't here before, unless it's this guy having a lay down here. So either my original thought is correct, that they're kicking the shit out of someone who's about to turn into a biophage, and when they disappear, it's them actually mutating off screen, or a random biophage just rocked up during the scene. No matter which one you think it is, both fail as the grand reveal of the monster. This should be one of the most memorable moments of the game, and either way, it sucks. You've got it being beaten up, or just turning up. Can we quickly talk about the design of the starting biophage? It's so boring. Sci-fi horror has a long history of creative and terrifying creature design. The first time you see the necromorphs, you can't quite see them due to the lighting, only able to make out its silhouette. It's not until you get to the lift that you get a proper look at one of them as it forces open the doors, seeing the twisted humanoid body that begins to tell you what happened to the crew. In the Callisto Protocol, you get a zombie, and what's really disappointing is that the concept art is much more interesting. Can you imagine the death animation for this thing? It'd be like that scene in Pirates of the Caribbean when Davy Jones checks that guy's sinuses. How did Disney sign off on this? The game does slightly claw back some of the threat, as we see how barbaric and strong these creatures are as it tears off someone's head. The first encounter with an enemy in a survival horror should be when the player is the most helpless. This is where you don't know anything yet. Going back to Dead Space, you're so helpless that you have to run away. It's not that you have to lose the first encounter for the game to set up the threat. In the Resident Evil 2 remake, during your first encounter with a zombie, the game expects you to kill the zombie. The threat is shown as we see that zombies are a bit peckish, but also bullet sponges, They take a lot of bullets to go down, so while one on its own might not be too bad, groups of zombies will be near impossible to take down. We're also shown that whilst they move slowly, the tight corridors means that trying to get around them will get you grabbed, so you either need to kill them or temporarily stun them, both requiring ammo and good aim. The Callisto Protocol has no sense of helplessness whatsoever, as just before you fight it, Jacob takes on these two prisoners. How helpless do you think Jacob is in this fight, where he easily defeats these two and then just squares up to the biophage? Where is the threat? It even gets the small things wrong, as you can dismember the biophage in this game as well, but in Dead Space, it makes the necromorphs feel unstoppable. Here, it makes Jacob feel unstoppable, as he tears them apart as he kills them. This encounter sets the stage for the rest of the game, and it's fallen flat. I have no sense of dread about running into these things, especially when the combat is this easy. Actually, you know what? We're going to talk about how the combat is terrible, and why it makes an already unscary game more unscary. Part 2. The combat is terrible and makes an already unscary game more unscary. Let me ask you a question. Do horror games need to be difficult? On the surface, making a game difficult will increase the tension. It will up the threat of the enemies and make the player more apprehensive about the combat encounters. The problem with difficulty in horror games is that it can make the player lose any fear if they fail too often. It can still be enjoyable and keep the tension high, but by making a player play the same section over and over again because of the difficulty, it will stop that section from being scary. I don't think horror games need to be difficult, they need the illusion of difficulty. The combat encounters need to feel like you've won by the skin of your teeth, and in order to do this, horror games need to be skillful. Most horror games rely on the same skill, your aiming. Dead Space has you aiming for the extremities to take down the necromorphs, or Resident Evil 2 has you aiming for either the head or legs to get past the zombies. The difficulty slider then increases or decreases the demand of that skill, with the easy difficulty giving you more ammo, meaning you have more opportunities to make the shot, and lowers enemies' health, reducing the amount of times you need to make that shot, while higher difficulties do the opposite to increase the demand of that skill. Regardless of the difficulty though, you still need that skill in order to progress. You still need to make those shots. The Callisto Protocol has no skill requirement. Starting with the melee combat, which is the majority of the combat in the game, it has no skill to it. You dodge, then attack, repeat as needed. In order to dodge, you have to hold down the left thumbstick to either dodge to the left or right. That may sound like a strange criticism to make. It's like criticizing Bloodborne for having to press circle to dodge, but in Bloodborne, you have to react to the enemy and dodge at the right time. The Callisto Protocol has no such requirement. It has no dodge timing. It flat out tells you that. So when I tell you that all you need to do is hold down the joystick, that's it. You can make Jacob just walk sideways and he will automatically dodge. The direction you go doesn't matter either. You don't need to react to which way the enemy is swinging, you just need the stick held down. The only slight skill to these fights is having to change the direction of the stick between hits. No timing, as long as you do it before they swing again, you're good. Any threat that the game had before this tutorial fight has been lost because of this dodge mechanic. The game does feature a perfect dodge, so you might be thinking that that's the skill that melee combat wants you to focus on, but all it does is slow down time, allowing you to unwind your heavy attack, which you could never do if you just dodged normally. It does allow you to interrupt an enemy's combo, but they're so short that it's basically irrelevant. The timing for the perfect dodge is really weird as well. You'd be forgiven if you assumed that to perform the perfect dodge, you need to wait for the last possible moment to dodge. I did, but instead you have to dodge as early as possible. What this means is that if you mistime it, it doesn't matter. There's no downside to it as the game has no dodge timing, just hold down the thumbstick and dodge the attack. These type of systems work on a high risk, high reward mentality. The Resident Evil 3 remake has a similar mechanic with a perfect dodge, but it's required to do it the last possible moment and has dodge timing, so trying to perform this has the risk of being grabbed, so you either lose health or an item to escape. This has the reward of the game snapping to the head of the enemy you dodged. I don't like the auto aim, but there is a clear risk reward system to this mechanic. You might not personally think it's worth the risk, but you could understand why someone would. In the Callisto Protocol, there is no risk and low reward with the perfect dodging. There's also a block mechanic where you need to pull the stick backwards, but you take chip damage, so the only time to use the block is with range attacks. There's no skill involved. Another problem with using the joystick to dodge and block is that it stops players from positioning themselves in the room. Say you're trying to back away from the enemies to get a clean shot or separate a group or whatever. Well, by holding backwards, the game makes you block, so you take damage. And if on higher difficulties, you can die from the block. You might be thinking that these mechanics look cool, and yeah, they do. The animations are done well, and it looks very cinematic. Seeing Jacob rip through enemies is cool to look at, and I like how when you do dismember an enemy, it does change the fight a bit, like when you take an arm off and they can only swing once now, but it's all surface level. These animations make Jacob look like an action hero, but if you want your game to be scary, the last thing you want your player character to be is an action hero. Does Jacob look even slightly helpless here? No, and this is what the majority of the game will look like, Jacob easily dodging all attacks. Other survival horror games do have a melee attack, but it's so weak that you never lead with it. It's always a last resort. This is when you're out of ammo and your back's against the wall. Compare Jacob's smooth dodges to Isaac in Dead Space. He looks so stiff and tense, like every muscle in his body is contracting from how scared he is. Isaac's melee animations help sell this. This man doesn't know how to throw a punch. He's just swinging his weapon as hard as he can, hoping to kill whatever is in front of him. The Callisto Protocol, however, with this combat system, you're going to use melee combat to conserve ammo, and it's just easier. As I've already said, there's no skill involved in this system. In a making of documentary, the developers talk about why they put such a focus on melee combat in the game.
Picking melee as the 50% of our gameplay, you are very close to enemies. You're always within reach of them, and so you're in danger.
I feel like they've misunderstood why them being close to you is scary. The scariest parts of most survival horror games is when the monster is close to you, when you're within reach, and when you're physically hit. This is true. The reason this is the scariest part of these games is because they focus on ranged combat. Most of the time, you're on one side of the room, the enemies are on the other side, and you're doing everything to keep them away from you. So if they've gotten close to you, it's because you've made a mistake. You've failed a skill check. You've missed your shots, you haven't kept track of your ammo and had to reload, or you've poorly positioned yourself in the room. You're already on the back foot before they swung at you. The ranged combat also adds to the stress, as when they're far away, you can aim for their weak spots to maximize damage, while when they're close up, you can't really make those shots. You're most likely panic firing, wasting ammo. All of this adds together to make a very stressful situation, with the final resort being the melee button, where you'll most likely get hit and maybe even die. This is also an outlier for the player. Most combat encounters don't end up with them getting that close. 90-95% of the time, you can keep the enemies at bay, but that 5-10% when they do get close is terrifying. By having your melee combat be a viable option, this ratio changes to, in the game director's own words, 50-50. The enemies being that close to you for 50% of the game takes away any fear of them. You're overexposed to being in the danger zone, as this is how most players will start all fights. Usually, when a monster pops up, your instinct is to run away, to keep it away from you at all costs. But not in the Callisto Protocol. Your first instinct is to run at the monster, to beat it up. Does that sound indicative of fear? Talking of overexposure, in that making of documentary I spoke about, the developers talk about how they wanted brutality and gore to generate the fear of the game. These things can generate great moments of fear, but that's just it, moments of fear. The first Alien film does it great, with the chestburster scene being a sudden injection of gore, but afterwards, the film doesn't use gore again to create fear. It actually stays away from gore for the rest of the film, with it either being in quick cuts or off screen entirely, because gore is shock value, it has diminished returns. Seeing it once is terrifying, seeing it 10 times is boring. The game is brutal, I can't dismiss that, and clearly they put a lot of work into it, with the death animations being very gory. I can't show you them as we're on YouTube, but you can make out what's happening with this blurred out death scene. The problem is that with both your killing animations and your death animations, the game is just too gory to keep me scared. It loses all its shock value by the 30th minute, and when one of your core pillars to build fear is already crumbling half an hour in, you've got a problem. Dead Space also uses gore as well, but it doesn't rely on it to generate fear, and being released in 2008, gore in gaming wasn't as prevalent. The big issue with using gore to try to create fear is that gore has permeated so much of modern gaming that it's not a shock anymore, it's expected. With game series like God of War, Doom, Mortal Kombat, and loads others, and all those games I showed aren't horror games, gore is just a part of gaming, so you need to be creative with it to make an impression, and this just doesn't do it. I'm so desensitized to gore that when I first saw a death animation, I laughed. This combat system also doesn't work with multiple enemies either. The way the game wants you to see these things is as unstoppable monsters that won't stop coming for you, but in practice, they patiently wait their turn to attack you. When attacking and dodging one of the biophage, the others just stand around waiting for you to be done. I assumed, when I first played this game, that they would dogpile you when you were attacked by multiple enemies, letting the game move to a more range-focused combat as I now had a gun, but nope. The game lets you take out one, then another, using your baton, while everyone else just waits their turn. Unless you're unlucky and two biophages attack at the same time and dodging one moves you into the way of the other, so you'll get hit no matter what. This reliance on melee combat also ruins the survival part of survival horror. The genre, survival horror, is a bit of an undefined term. It's kind of like that saying about pornography, I know it when I see it, but if I was to personally define it, I would say it's down to inventory management in a scary game. The purest form of survival horror has you balancing key items, weapons, limited ammo, and health items in a limited inventory. Then you get more diluted forms, where things like weapons and key items don't take up inventory space, leaving more emphasis on limited ammo and health. I wouldn't say that one is inherently better than the other, but the best survival horror games do make you feel like you're going to run out of ammo, but never do. Too much ammo, and you're less scared, and can go in guns blazing. Too little ammo, and players won't be able to advance, getting frustrated, and no longer being scared. Games then add another layer to this as well, more personalised to each game. The Resident Evil games have such a small inventory that it becomes about whether or not to take more ammo and weapons, meaning less space for health and puzzle pieces, or do you take less ammo and weapons, meaning more space, but you might not survive. Dead Space has a bigger inventory, but only gives you ammo for the weapons you're currently carrying, so do you take less weaponry for more ammo for your preferred guns, or more weaponry with less ammo for each? The Callisto Protocol doesn't have any of this. As the melee combat is so viable, you can just hoard the ammo you find, resulting in an inventory that looks like this. In other survival horror games, when you have to make space in your inventory for an important item, it's an agonizing decision. On Callisto, I didn't give it another thought, just dropped some ammo or health because I knew that 1, I wouldn't need it, and 2, I'd find more in a bit. My first playthrough of the game, I played it on medium difficulty, and the amount of health I found is insane. The levels were littered with these health injectors, so I either collected them to sell or just straight up ignored them. As we're talking about the health, it's also poorly done. The health injectors have a long animation. The idea being that if you take a lot of damage, you have to give yourself enough room to be able to heal. This is a good system that can generate tension in a fight, so point to the game. The problem is that this isn't the only way to heal. Enemies will drop health packets that will heal you instantly. It's not as effective as the health injectors, but it's instantaneous. This means that you're only going to use the health injectors outside of combat, so the animation is just a waste of time now. I'm just gonna, thank you. I did replay the game a few times, once on hardcore mode, which states an emphasis on the lack of resources, and I still had a full inventory. Not as often as before, but it still happened, and even when I didn't have a full inventory, I never once worried about having enough resources to get through a section. The only real thing the hardcore mode added was having the enemies have more health, which was more tedious than difficult, and making the grip last about as long as me. It did make the game a little bit more interesting, as I had to think a bit more about how to position myself in the room, but it still wasn't challenging, or fun. This is all dependent on difficulty. I played all these games on medium because I believe that's what the average player will pick, so I had plenty of ammo most of the time, but still, it always felt like a limited resource. Even when I had over 100 bullets and plenty of health items, I was still worried about running out. I never did with the Callisto Protocol because of this combat system. Even on the highest difficulty, I had no issue. Any of these other games, when I've played them in the past on hard or higher, I seriously struggled. Sorry, later me here. A load of footage got corrupted, so I had to replay the games. This time I played them on hard, and yeah, I struggled. To those of you actually watching this, and not just having it on the background as you do the dishes or cook or scroll on your phone, that's right, I see you. You'll notice that while I'm whinging about the combat, I have low health in some of the clips I've shown, and that's because the combat is janky as fuck. There is a grab attack that you can't dodge or block, costing you health, and it's really inconsistent if you can stagger enemies. First, the game tells you that you can interrupt attacks in the tutorial as you hit this guy before he lands a punch, but if you bring this into an actual fight, you're more likely than not going to get hit, because even if you do hit them first, they'll still hit you. This means that if you start your swing and they begin theirs afterwards, you're going to take damage. It leads to a lot of bullshit, honestly. Not only in fights where you try to open up an attack window, but also when they break through windows or come out of a vent, and you try to get the first hit, they'll still hit you. Some of you are probably saying that the melee combat is just one way of playing the game. You can choose to use the guns if you want, and that is true, but the game really pushes the melee combat onto you, with the guns just here to supplement that melee combat. The first hour of the game is just melee combat, where you won't struggle with the fights. It's not like the start of Dead Space 2, where you can only use the kinesis at the start. You can tell that this isn't the correct way to play. The game isn't showing you that this playstyle is the best way to engage enemies, it's putting you on the back foot until you can find something better. It also uses the same skill set you need for the rest of the game. Your aim is being tested from the start and will continue to be tested until the very end. It's also different enough to keep the mechanic interesting. While the kinesis is overpowered, it's a limited resource in the fact that you need to find something to throw. Unlike the guns, where you can keep your aim auto-aim on the enemies and snap from one to another, once you fire your projectile, which will do massive damage, maybe even kill them in one shot, you need to frantically look around for another projectile, taking your eyes off the approaching enemies. Even with its overpowered damage, it's not an easy mode for the combat, it's a mechanic to help the player with fights, with its own advantages and drawbacks, but most importantly, it doesn't replace the guns. People aren't relying on the kinesis to play the game. Going back to Callisto Protocol, the game starts with the correct way to play, with no skill or resources needed, and has no problem taking on groups, then gives you a gun, requiring actual skill and resources to use. Which combat style are you going to stick with? This decision is not helped by the fact that you already feel like you're progressing with the melee combat. The first weapon you get is a pickaxe, and then 20 minutes later you get a stun baton. Before getting the first gun, you've already upgraded your melee weapon. You're more likely to stick with the path you've already progressed down than switch to a new playstyle. The biggest reason that the guns feel like they're here to supplement the melee combat is that when you're first handed a gun, the first thing the game tells you isn't about shooting limbs or even how to fire or anything like that. The first thing the game tells you is that the game will automatically aim the gun at the end of a melee combo. I've seen arguments about what should and shouldn't be included in survival horror. Things like machine guns or automatic saves are the more common ones that I see that shouldn't be included, but what everyone can agree with is that aimbots should never be included in a game trying to be scary. Any skill that the gun's brought to the game has already been lost before you fire a shot. But hey, you only get the aimbot at the end of a melee combo, right? Right? No, you can get homing bullets for two of the guns, those being the machine gun and a shotgun. I don't think I need to tell you, but those are the worst weapons to have aim hacks on if you're trying to make me feel tense. It's like the game is going out of its way to remove any skill needed for the gameplay. Halfway through the game, the biophage get a second phase introduced. After taking damage, they'll sprout tentacles that you need to shoot before they can evolve into a tougher version, increasing their health and damage. You can stop them from mutating by shooting the tentacles. Here we go, a bit of skill is now required as the auto-aim doesn't target the tentacles, so you need to switch between your melee and guns in order to take them down before they change. That is until you get an upgrade that lets your auto-aim target the tentacles, and this upgrade is on your baton, so it's applied to every gun in the game. We can then see another issue with the tentacles. It's a one-shot kill. With the upgrade, it makes it stupidly easy. However, on higher difficulties, it's no longer a one-shot kill, but the timing window is too small to actually kill them before they turn most of the time. And the hitboxes for the tentacles is awful, so the auto-aim does fuck all. That was an entire clip. If you don't have the upgrade to change where the auto-aim focuses, you have to either wait for it to deactivate or manually aim it down after it auto-aims you to its head. Either way, on higher difficulties, it gives the enemy enough time to attack you again, so you can't get the shot off. It basically forces you to always have to deal with their enhanced form. Oh, and by the way, that's basically every enemy you're going to face from here on out. What should be a random chance mechanic that fills you with dread when you see the tentacles instead makes the game too easy on lower difficulties and irrelevant on higher difficulties. When the biophage sprout tentacles, it should be terrifying, with you putting all your energy and ammo into killing them before they can mutate, rather than an easy kill or something you can't avoid. And even if they do change, meh. Like, yeah, they get more health and damage, but they're just as easy to dodge and attack. I remind you that all you need to do to dodge is flick the stick left or right. All these tentacles do is either make it a bit too easy or a bit more tedious. If, instead, the enemies couldn't be dodged after evolving, that would make it terrifying when they appear. It would force the player to make that biophage their priority, and if you failed to kill them before they changed, the player would have to use a lot of ammo to kill them, bringing in that survival element we were talking about. The big problem with this system of combat is that it stops Jacob from being helpless, and don't worry, it does get worse, but we'll get to that in a minute. For now, this might be a huge nitpick, but I think it's indicative of Jacob not being even slightly helpless. He puts his weapon away when he's not in combat. Jacob's so confident in his abilities that he's happy to holster his weapon. I don't know about you, but if I was in this situation, I would never put down my weapon. Isaac only puts his weapon down once, and that's because he's lost his grip after being thrown by a boss, and he immediately picks it back up. Seeing Jacob do this stopped me from feeling helpless. So, the melee combat needs no skill and the guns are secondary. Could it get worse? Yes. The grip. The grip is a device used by the guards to subdue inmates, and by subdue, I mean pick them up and throw them. What could have been an interesting way of messing with the player, say it was used to lock the player in place, having to use ranged weapons to kill enemies before they got too close, is wasted. You can see that being able to pick up enemies is too OP for a survival horror game, that it should be saved for the end as that final overcoming the monster moment. So, you get it in Chapter 3. You might disagree with me about how the build up to the enemies and mechanics of the game take away the fear or threat of the biophage, but how can you find these things scary when you can pick them up and go, whee? It's yet another thing that shouldn't be in a survival horror game. I just don't see how this was added. If I really give the game the benefit of the doubt, maybe it could be seen as a way to separate out groups of enemies, as you can either bring them closer or shoot them across the room, allowing you to take on enemies one-on-one. The grip in and of itself isn't an instant kill, because that would be fucking stupid having something that overpowered. But it is an instant kill when used with environmental hazards, and these are put in basically all of the areas you fight enemies. It makes the fight so easy as you can just do this. Even the enhanced enemies you get can be picked up and thrown, so it doesn't even matter if you let them change. You can also just drop enemies off the map. When going into the shoe, you're on this moving platform and some ranged enemies fire whatever this is at you, and I can't be sure, but this feels like you're supposed to shoot them. Like this was designed for ranged combat, but you can just pick them up and drop them into the void. You don't even need a bottomless pit for this. As long as it's over a railing or something, it kills them. Like here, when I dropped one onto a pipe and it died instantly. There are a few areas that doesn't litter the walls with spikes and whatnot, and they are by far the most fun and tense, I use those words comparatively, bits of the game, until you find a small box. The game does try to balance the grip. It has a limited charge and will refill after it's depleted. However, this can swing too far in the other direction, making the grip unusable for long periods of time. Once the charge is depleted, an unupgraded grip takes 3 full minutes to recharge before it can be used again. That's on all difficulties as well. If you fully upgrade the recharge time, it's lowered to 1 minute 30, so it's still mostly unusable in the same fight. It was rare that a fight took me more than a minute. The concept is good with the recharge time, it's just really poorly implemented. They then screw up this mechanic with the introduction of grip batteries, which instantly refill your grip. And because you can hold these in your inventory and don't sell for much, it's really easy to hoard these, and then you have basically infinite grip, ruining the entire idea of the recharge time. If they took out the grip battery and reduced the recharge time, maybe it would work, but I don't think the grip itself is a good idea. The UI for the grip is terrible as well. They've gone for a diegetic design, and when this is done well, it can help create a seriously immersive experience. The Callisto Protocol does this fine for the most part. The grip meter, however, is awful. This is the standard view you get of it when you're not aiming down sight. You get this little blue square that's either full if you have some charge or hollow if you're out. It doesn't inform you of how much charge you have, just if you have some or not. When you aim down sight, it expands into a thin blue line comprised of 5 sections. The game doesn't explain what these bars represent. Is each section an individual use of the grip, or is it a bar that will slowly deplete? It's the second one, by the way, but it depletes from both sides, so you have half as much as you thought. The real problem is that because it's a thin blue line, it's difficult to see how much grip you have left. This is worsened because as the grip depletes, you want to fire off an enemy as quickly as possible, making Jacob look around frantically, so the grip meter is basically unreadable in your peripheral vision. These UI elements need to be understood without directly looking at it, as in a fight, your attention will be on the enemies. All of this needs to be readable without looking at it. A GDC on the UI of Dead Space talks about this exact point.
So we had to find a way to show it to you, but not show it to you.
The health bar does this well, as it's thicker and goes from green to orange to red, depending on how much health you have. You can understand this without ever looking at it. The grip meter does beep at you when it's low, but that only communicates to the player that they're low, not how low. Do they have enough to grip 1 more enemy? 2 more enemies? Do they only have enough to bring someone closer? This information needs to be available to the player without them having to stare at the UI. It could be worse, I suppose. At least you can sort of see it. You can't when you're crouching. In the standard view, your stun baton covers the health and grip. You can maneuver the camera so you can see over the baton, but that's such bad design. Going back to that GDC talk, they talk about how important it was to always keep the rig at the same point of the screen, so the player always knows where to look for the health and whatnot. They even get this right in Dead Space 3. I like this GDC video, although it does go to some strange places.
Crack the eyeball out, where you realize that eyeballs are stuck in there pretty well.
In the standard view, if you remember, you can't see the full bar until you look down sight, and if you're crouching, the UI can easily become obstructed. So during stealth sections, when you have to stay crouched, you can't always make an informed choice on whether or not you have enough grip to take out an enemy, or if you're just going to alert it. I really do not like the grip. It ruins so much of the game. Look at these holdout sections. They're filled with environmental hazards and grip batteries. Like, look at this. Every surface is an open gear. These sections sections are intended to be challenging and intimidating, having enemies be able to pop out of anywhere while trapped in a room should be tense and test your skills, not just be a pick up and throw simulator. This also shows that the game expects these to be difficult, as the enemies come in waves, so if you grip them all really quickly, you're just waiting around until the next wave. I don't know if this is meant to build tension, not knowing where they are or when they're going to attack, but I was just bored waiting for them. There is one holdout section that isn't filled with environmental hazards. Instead, the game devs filled it with explosive canisters. If, however, you enjoy this combat style, don't worry, you can pay for more of it, with the Riot mode being DLC. I hope I've explained why these three combat systems don't work in a survival horror game, as each on their own takes away any tension or threat from the enemies, but when you put them together, it can completely destroy any chance of fear, no matter what situation the game tries to put you in. There's an enemy type called rushers that can camouflage themselves and climb up walls, so the idea is they'll pop out randomly from somewhere, and the tension is built from having to wait for them to attack. They're heavily inspired by the stalker enemies from Dead Space 2. They have a similar concept of you knowing they're out there, but having to wait for them to come out. You can't force them out unless you get close to a corner they're hiding behind, but if you do that, you're going to get hit. So you just have to sit there with the tension rising until they attack, making that awful noise. Now that they're out in the open, you've got a fast moving target running straight at you, so now you're under tension to kill it before it gets to you. This works because you have no control over this situation, you just have to wait for it. The rushes don't work as you can just grip them and drop them off the map, or beat them up in your own time. It's a shame because I like the creature design of this enemy, it's the only one I like in this game, as the rest are just space zombies with slight variations. Dead Space had such great enemy design, as even the most deformed versions of necromorphs, you can still see the human features on it. That's such great body horror, as these once normal humans are twisted and broken, but still recognizable. I spoke earlier of the boring design of the first biophage, and when I first played the game, I thought the game was going to start with just an infected human, and then get worse and worse, but it doesn't. Other than the Rusher and the Bloodworm enemies, they never go beyond infected human, they always retain that humanoid shape. The worst designed, in my opinion, are the blind. These are the longest infected biophages. This is where the game designers' imagination should have run wild, made some awful, disgusting twisted human creature, and it's just a regular human with a few tentacle dreadlocks. I'm not saying that you can't do scary humanoid enemies. The Last of Us does this very well with the clickers, but it works here because the game puts so much effort into the realism with the characters, setting, and gameplay that humanoid enemies are scary because they feel so real. It also helps that the game has given the two scariest enemies some actual threat. You have the Stalkers, which are similar to the Stalkers from Dead Space 2. They'll hide behind cover and you have to wait for them to come out to get you. Or the Clicker, which is a blind enemy that is very tough and an instant kill if they grab you, so you have to use stealth, kill them at a distance, or time it right to beat them down with a brick. The blind don't have this threat because of the combat I've already discussed, but also because the stealth isn't good in this game. I'm not going to be too critical here because this feels more like the developers didn't have enough time to refine this bit, because I very much doubt that being able to do this was a creative decision. The silent assassinations aren't silent, which makes these conga lines of murder even funnier. Even if you do alert one, if they don't emit a noise or alert the others to your presence, it will just try to attack you, running past other blind enemies on its way. You can have a full-on fight without aggroing other enemies. It won't surprise you to hear, but the grip ruins this part as well. With every section having wall spikes, it allows you to easily dispatch these enemies as slamming a body into a wall doesn't alert anyone. And if you miss the wall spikes, just try again, no problem. Again, it feels like the developers knew that stealth sequences can be scary and tense, but failed to understand why. The tension comes from the slow, methodical approach you have to take when being stealthy. You have to plan out your route, time it right, and make sure you've accounted for all the variables, like where the other enemies are, will they hear you, will they see you? So by having the blind be blind and not reacting to you assassinating the others, or picking them up and throwing them, it makes these sections tedious and boring, not tense and rewarding. There's no consequence for messing up the stealth as well. Usually, this was from the grip running out just before I threw one, so fired a shot instead. This happened more than you'd expect, but that might be down to my own stupidity. But also, the terrible UI made it difficult to tell. But yeah, even when I did alert all of them, the terrible combat made it so it didn't matter. If I'm already bored of the combat and general gameplay, forcing me to move slowly through an even boringer section is really making it difficult to complete the game. Now, if you're an idiot like me, you might think that the best way to play is to focus on melee and the grip, because the game tells you that's the best way to play. You may even take this one step further and begin selling ammo so you can buy more upgrades or make room for health or grip batteries. If you do this, you can't complete the game. The bosses have to be killed using guns, so you can softlock yourself. You can't grip them, and the game doesn't let you melee them. Jacob will just swing aimlessly. You have to use a gun. So if you don't have enough ammo, fuck you. The subreddit has, among other things, loads of people complaining about this. Having a boss only be able to be killed through guns isn't inherently bad, but I do think it's bad design that so many players got stuck here. Most games telegraph when you're about to fight a boss because you'll suddenly be given loads of ammo, and there is an argument that this way ruins the resource management and gives away the fact that you're about to fight a boss, but I'd rather these arguments than not be able to complete the game. If you do have enough ammo, the boss fights themselves are bad anyway. They suffer from the same issues as the melee combat. Hold stick to dodge, then instead of meleeing, shoot. Repeat until dead. The only one that tries to change this up slightly is the final boss, where it has a ranged attack as well. This, again, is a fuck you to the player. As I said earlier, there are ranged attacks that you can't dodge, you have to block, but in the fights with the spitters, you can either shoot their heads off or grip them to you and beat them down. So the player isn't encouraged to upgrade the block because the rest of the game allows you to ignore it. So when the boss fight has ranged attacks that you can't dodge and Jacob is too slow to move out the way, you're going to take a load of damage from an attack the game hasn't prepared you for, leading to a lot of unfair deaths. Also, while I'm discussing this fight, the first phase is just the same fight you had with Captain Farris earlier, and he repeats the same voice lines from when you're trying to get back up to the prison, which makes no sense here.
You're gonna have to get past me to make it back up.
It's a complete repeat of the earlier fight, down to the voice lines. Dead Space didn't have incredible boss fights, other than the Leviathan fight. The other two were forgettable, but had enough time between them that they didn't drag down the game. How many boss fights are there in the Callisto Protocol? 6, and they're all in the last 3 chapters. Well, actually, the below chapter ends with the first boss fight, so it's more like 2 and a bit chapters. With each chapter taking roughly an hour, that's 6 boss fights in 2 hours, or 1 every 20 minutes. It's not even 6 boss fights, it's 3, with 1 being repeated 4 times. After introducing the 2-head boss fight, they just threw it in as much as possible. It makes it feel like they just gave up by the end, especially when they added more normal enemies into the fight to make it more of a challenge. I'm of the opinion that if you add normal enemies to make a boss fight interesting, you failed at making a good fight. It's to the point where I'm not even sure if the 2-head is meant to be a boss or a mini boss fight. I'm genuinely not sure anymore. That extends to the security robots. They're such a wasted idea in this game, as they're actually shown to be a threat to the player, as we see them quickly take out some prisoners, and then you're forced to sneak around one of them. These are actually better shown as a threat to the player than the main enemy of the game, and they only appear 3 times. This is what I mean about if they're a mini boss or not, as they can't be meleeed or gripped, and they're difficult fights. Like, you need to be ready to go to war if you want to take one down. To be fair, that was on medium difficulty. What about hardcore? The robots will kill you in one shot, but that doesn't make it difficult, it's just down to who fires first. The only way to make this interesting is if you play on contagion mode. Sorry, that's a typo. If you pay for the contagion mode. That's right, you need to buy the permadeath mode for this game. All this culminates in a game that makes you feel like you should be able to experiment and try out different builds, but instead forces you to play the game only one way, melee and grip the majority, and then forces you to use guns against the bosses. This extends to the skill tree as well. The grip and baton are fine, as you have different upgrade branches to choose from, like damage or heavy attacks or whatever, but the guns only have one path with the occasional offshoot. You can't customize them how you want, only how the game wants. I know I've compared the Callisto Protocol to games that have a different combat style, and while my points are objectively correct, I want to compare this game to a game that has a similar combat progression as the Callisto Protocol. The Silent Hill 2 remake follows a similar path, as it starts by giving the player a melee weapon, and then later on gives you a gun. Silent Hill 2 does this system correctly though. It makes James, and therefore the player, feel helpless. Look at the attack animations. This is not an action hero, it's some guy who's picked up a bit of wood. It's the same with the dodge. Instead of this smooth slide to the side, James looks like he's going to fall over. The combat styles may look similar on the surface, with it being dodge, then hit, repeat, but they feel so different because Silent Hill has dodge timing. It makes the combat a challenge, therefore tense. These things also don't drop anything, so fighting them will more likely cost you resources, so the game is encouraging the player to run away from them rather than fight them. So when you do fight them, they're actually scary as you spent so long running away from them. The enemies will attack you all at once as well, making groups of them a much bigger threat, meaning the ranged combat is now a viable solution. And I can't believe I have to say this, but it doesn't have an auto aim, so there's challenge and skill involved in the combat, who would have known that would make a game fun and tense? If you're crap at shooting or run out of bullets or whatever, you're not soft locked either. It's possible to complete the whole game just using melee. It's bloody difficult, but it's doable. If you're wondering why you're looking at the trophy information rather than me defeating a boss using melee, it's because I spent half an hour on it and gave up. These mechanics make the game scary, helped by the tone, story, music and creature design. It's such a breath of fresh air to play this after the Callisto Protocol just because of the creature design alone. The first enemy you face has so much more thought put into it, with it being this writhing creature trapped in its own flesh in agony, appearing to have high heels and spits out poison, or maybe it's illness, like someone else James would know, who was also trapped in their own flesh, in agony, who would have worn high heels and coughed up their illness. At Black Iron, you get a man, a tall man, 2 men, and what conservatives say will happen if you get a vaccine. Just to stop a comment, yes, James does also put his weapon away. If it was me, I definitely wouldn't in this situation, but James clearly has some mental stuff going on, so it makes more sense in the context of the story. Plus, Silent Hill 2 has a mechanic where radio static will play if you're close to enemies, so James knows when he's in danger, so knows when he'll need his weapon out, while Jacob should have no idea if he's in danger or not, so should always have his weapon ready. This mechanic is so good for generating fear as well, because it only tells you you're in danger, but not where from, making the situation tense. The game messes with the player as well, as there are these cockroach enemies that will also start the static, so when you hear it and think you're in danger when it's just a bug on the floor, or when it is an actual enemy, they can hide from you and jump out. If you like the idea of a survival horror game with a good mix of melee and range combat, I implore you, please play the Silent Hill 2 remake instead of this. Everything they've added to the combat in the Callisto Protocol is terrible. It stops the game from being scary, especially the grip with all these things on the wall. Like, why are all these things here as well? Like, within the world of the game, why are there spike traps on the walls and open gears in a prison? Look at this room. Who signed off on this being in a prison? Judging from concept art and the game itself, this is the main way into the shoe, the maximum security area of the prison. Do the guards have to go past all these exposed gears to get to work every morning? Do they have to take prisoners past them? Or are they putting their cells down the lift shaft somewhere? Which raises its own problems. Isn't the point of this design to have the worst prisoners on a suspended platform, so even if they do escape their cells, they can't get further into the prison? But we see that down the lift shaft are human-sized vents that take them away from the shoe. Oh no, there is a trap here, and again, I ask you why this is here within the world of the game. Why would someone design a trap that is so easy to avoid? I don't know about you, but if I was designing a death trap, I wouldn't include gaps down the side. I understand that it's a game, so the player has to have a way to avoid it, but it just needs more thought than this. Jacob has the grip, for example, something used by the guards, so wouldn't it make sense that the trap could be avoided or switched off using the grip, as a guard might end up there for whatever reason and would need a way to survive? This would make it more unique to Jacob and why other prisoners couldn't do this. This might feel like I'm just nitpicking, but this is such lazy level design and world building. If you want me to feel immersed in your world, make it feel like a world, not just a collection of areas squeezed together. I think you know where this is going. Part 3. Level design. You may disagree with me about the combat, that the combat isn't what makes the game scary, it's the atmosphere the game creates. And while I disagree with that, because why should I be scared when the enemies aren't scary? But for the sake of argument, let's look at the atmosphere away from the combat. In Dead Space 1, a great part of the level design is that the vents are so distinct. They're everywhere on the Ishimura, and made to be obvious to the player. As the necromorphs use these to travel around the ship, and pop out with a distinct noise, it creates an association between the vents and danger for the player. It's a great way of building paranoia, keeping the player's guard up and the tension high. Black Iron Prison also has vents that the biophage use, but they're much less distinct, blending into the background, so you never develop that anxiety around them, not helped by the fact that the biophage are just not scary, but we've spoken about that, so I'll move on. Usually, they will just pop out in front of you in the hope of a jump scare. It's that argument between suspense versus surprise. Clearly, I lean in the direction of suspense, as I think it's more scary to live in fear of an enemy attack than have a jump scare where an enemy just pops out at me, which rarely happened anyway, as the enemy placement in the Callisto Protocol is terrible. Most of the time, when you enter a room, the enemies will just be standing in it at the other end, or enter the room in front of you. Sometimes they'll try to obscure enemies with smoke or steam or whatever, but they always come from the same direction. A great way of building fear is to have the player know they're in danger, but not know where from. Because of that distinctive sound of the vents being broken, Dead Space uses this perfectly, making sure you hear it, but not see it, it, so you need to search for what broke the vent. And as the game has a variety of enemies, 2 of which can climb on walls, not only do you need to search the floor for enemies, but you also need to check above you for the necromorphs. This leads to frantically searching in every direction for enemies. The best jump scares in gaming are when the enemies sneak up on you because you as a player have missed them. No loud music or boom or anything, just the sight of an enemy you didn't expect. Not only do you get startled, the fear doesn't dissipate. As you're still in danger, you have to react quickly to either get away or kill it. All the enemies just appearing in front of you, with the best attempt of fear as them jumping out of a vent or through glass, gives the player too much information. There's no tension as you know where the monsters are, so can easily go kill them. The best the game gets at building suspense through enemy placement is during the parts where you're outside the prison as you find multiple enemies frozen, and it has that feeling of not every frozen enemy will attack, but any of them could. Unfortunately, the game doesn't take advantage of this, as it's more of the same, with enemies only becoming active when you get close. The game tries to make it feel like you're going to get overwhelmed, as Danny is yelling at you to hurry up.
Jacob! Over here! Over here!
Then, when you scramble into the snow cab, Jacob slams the door like they're about to get in, but like, nothing's following you. It makes more sense that he's slamming the door because he didn't want to let the heat out. The game does try to have a bit more imagination with the enemy placement at times. One is the holdout sections, but I've already spoken about them, so we'll move on. The other time is during the Aftermath chapter. You can head off the main path, heading through this door, do some vents and whatnot, and then head back into that starting room. If, before you leave, you look through the window, you can see these 2 biophages waiting for you. Have no fear, there's a vent that allows you to sneak behind them. It rewards more observant players and lets you choose how to approach the fight. Do you go in and take them in a fair fight, sneak up and stealth kill them, or just leave, not bothering to kill them? It's stuff like this that the game needed to keep the gameplay interesting. This example is a bit buggy, as they spawn when you look through the window, not when you return to the room, so you can just force them to despawn by looking at them before you go through the vent. While not as bad as it was on release, this game is still quite buggy. I had enemies randomly despawn and reset. The heavy attack allows you to teleport around the room, and I got a drum beat. Twice. The worst offender of enemies just popping up are the bloodworms, these snake-like enemies that will grab you in a jump scare. I saw people compare them to when Isaac gets grabbed by the huge tentacle, but the tentacle sections work as it requires skill to pass. You have to shoot the weak spot as it slowly pulls you. It is a bit silly how it periodically pulls you rather than slowly pulling you at all times, but I think that's due to hardware limitations rather than an artistic choice by the game devs. The bloodworms aren't skillful, it's just a button masher section, so it's not tense. More importantly, the tentacle grabs are spread out through the game. There's 3 that have roughly 2 hours between each one. The Callisto Protocol has 3 bloodworm grabs in 2 minutes. That's not a joke. How do they expect this to remain scary when it happens this often? It's just tedious now and a way for you to lose health, as most of them are in places that stop you from killing them before they can trigger. This extends to the jump scare they put everywhere of this little grub thing jumping out of a chest. This is indicative of the whole problem with how the game tries to build fear. It relies on jump scares.
Well, when you think about horror, you know, it's not just sort of an endless series of jump scares one after another.
This is a real shame, as the music is quite good. It's a bit formulaic, but it does do a good job of setting the tone. The problem is, the game doesn't let its music build up to anything. Most of the time, it's after you've had something jump out at you. It can't build any suspense. It's also poorly implemented. I've had a few times where the music was going off and nothing was happening. The sound design overall is very good, probably the best part of the game, beside the graphics. The deep metallic noises you'll hear are creepy. You'll hear biophage scrambling around near you. Again though, as the biophage are so unscary and unthreatening, you're not saying, please don't hear me, you're saying, come at me bro. Areas and locations that should be terrifying are poorly used, with nothing below the surface. You get a lot of telling, not showing, to try to build up the tension going into an area. In chapter 2, you have to head through solitary, and you get this exchange.
You can still reach the watchtower, just have to go the long way. Just be careful. They keep the real crazies down there.
So what do you think is in solitary? Biophage trapped in cells? Insane prisoners you need to fight off? Anything at all? Well, in Solitary, you get 2 jump scares, and then you see a biophage scuttle into a vent, never to be seen again. That's it. Solitary in the real world is shown to cause serious psychological damage, with prisoners showing a higher rate of depression, anxiety, and self-harm, along with a whole host of other problems. This shit is fucked up, and we really shouldn't do this to people. A horror game is a great medium to show how awful this practice is, and they do the bare minimum. Everything is so surface level. There's the small rooms, and you can hear some whispering in some of the cells, but there's nothing underneath. If you could find notes of people who slowly went insane while in Solitary, or find people that couldn't comprehend the danger they're in due to their damaged psyche, it could show how badly treated the prisoners were at Black Iron. I do like the cages you pass on the way to Solitary. It's some great environmental storytelling to show how the prisoners were treated like animals. I just wish there was more of this type of stuff. The whispering you hear isn't even from the prisoners. It's too personal to Jacob, as they use his name. Jacob. We only get the whispering when Jacob has his dream sequences. It's here to show Jacob's nagging guilt, but then why is it only used here outside of the dream sequences? What about Solitary makes Jacob feel guilty or reminds him what he did? If it was used more frequently, with it getting more intense, then it would be a good way of showing the player that something is up with Jacob, that his guilt is getting to him. But you don't get that whispering again until the end of the game, so it's just here to make it more creepy. Dead Space 1 has whispering as well, but it's here to show Isaac's mental decline. It steadily gets worse throughout the game. Look at the difference of Isaac walking down this hallway in chapter 1 and chapter 11. It's creepy, but it also actually has a reason behind it. The Callisto Protocol constantly has things in the level design which is creepy and scary on the surface, but has nothing underneath. In chapter 2, you can find an audio log of a guard who locked himself in the laundry, with a prison gang breaking in.
I don't know how long that door will hold.
Later in the game, you find a room filled with dead guards. It's gnarly, as they've been hacked apart and strung up. Finding an audio log, you hear that same prison gang.
I'll give you anything, whatever you want. I don't want anything from you. We're just having fun.
Do we meet this gang? Maybe they set up traps for us, or we need to fight prisoners that are weaker but smarter than the biophage. But again, no. After you leave this room, it's like it never happened. Dead Space does a great job of having all its messed up stuff tie into a larger idea. All the scribbling on the walls and messed up stuff you find the crew did before the ship was overrun with necromorphs was caused by the marker, as it triggers dementia and psychosis in people. The marker itself wasn't just something they happened to find. You can find logs that show a cult had infiltrated high up positions on the Ishimura and purposely came here to find the marker. You can see how all this adds layers to the events of the game. The game goes on to explain how the necromorphs work, as we find out that they're reanimated humans, mutated by the marker, and have 2 roles, one to reanimate corpses, and another to create corpses. This then leads to some of the most creepy moments in the game, as you can find necromorphs slowly dragging bodies away, or finding a room filled with bodies now has another layer to raise the tension, as we've seen them get turned, so you need to destroy the bodies before they have a chance. Any game that makes me paranoid about dead bodies has done something right. The Callisto Protocol has something similar to this, but with no reason behind it. As the biophage take over the prison, they begin to build webs and trap people, which is creepy. The game really wants you to know that they web up bodies, with different cutscenes highlighting it and having to walk past loads of bodies. But why do they do this? The first time we see the big mouth enemy, it turns the guard into a biophage, but he's still alive. Later on in the story, Danny's infected by a leech enemy, again while alive. So why do they cocoon people? We're shown one of them moving their eyes, but this is a biophage. It comes out and attacks you in just a second. Again, it feels like they had a creepy idea, but nothing behind it. You find out later that the prisoners were experimented on, so it's not outside the realm of possibility that you could find some audio logs that explain what the biophage do with the bodies and why they make these webs. Having it this late as well would make a second playthrough a new experience, as you now know the messed up reason they do what they do, instead of just confirming they're doing experiments on prisoners. Later in the game, you see the shoe again, this time covered in webs. But so? Danny says,
The whole prison's infected.
I already knew the whole prison was infected. Nowhere you go has been free of biophage. You already fought biophage in the shoe, so this all rings hollow. This could have been one of the most harrowing scenes in the game. If, for example, the area had been taken over had been a safe place earlier on in the game, though we had seen survivors, or if we knew of some messed up reason why they created the webs. It's not adding anything other than a creepy visual. The game has a bad streak when it comes to reuse locations. Dead Space didn't do the best when it came to retreading locations, but it changed the environment enough to keep it fresh, or had you explore new areas in that location, but the Callisto Protocol just adds them as fluff. There's no interesting environmental storytelling or anything. Just after this shoe reveal, you're brought back to your cell, and it actually looks looks better than when you left. I originally thought that the prison was being taken back and there'd be a bigger emphasis on robot combat, but no, you just leave and get attacked by the biophage. This is where a majority of prisoners would have been infected. This place should be crawling with biophage, but it's completely empty. The worst one for complete time wasting is in the colony chapter. Making your way through this shanty town, you find Danny, do a boss fight, and then the walkway collapses, so you need to go through the exact same area again. It's so pointless and adds nothing to the game. As we're on the subject, the levels themselves are quite hollow. It's very soulless, and I'm not just saying that to be mean. In the behind the scenes documentary, they talk about the level design.
When we were designing the creatures, mutation was something that we were putting forth, and then we were designing the environments to match that. We thought, oh, what matches mutation? Oh, what's a technology that matches mutation? There's something called generative design that's for taking man-made objects, throwing it through AI, and it mutates it into a new design. But what comes out looks very alien and not man-made at all.
Their reasoning doesn't make much sense to me. The prison was built by humans for humans, so why are you trying to make the architecture alien and mutated? It makes the prison feel fake and stops it from being immersive. When turning on the gears for the shoe, you have to climb up these chest-high boxes. There are no stairs or anything for someone to get up here, and don't say the prison was built by an evil company and blah blah blah, that's why it's badly designed. It still needs to make sense that a human could exist in this space. A great thing about Dead Space is that it feels like humans lived here. Every question you might have about how the ship operates is shown during the game. It's a mining ship, so how do they mine? We see how they hold and break down rocks taken from the planet. How do they eat? We see food being grown in hydroponics. Where does the crew sleep? We visit the crew deck. Each level has an actual reason to exist. This is helped by the smaller details, the zero gravity basketball, the practice range. You hear announcements as you traverse the Ishimura. It's such great world building that adds to the horror of the setting. People lived here and now they're gone, either dead or transformed into a nightmare. The sprawl is the same. We see schools, a residential area, unitology churches, and so on. Black Iron does do this slightly, as we do go through a woods, explaining how the prison has oxygen, but it's very skin deep. Who looks after these trees? Where are the botanists? All you can find is evidence that the guards were here. Does this area also grow food? Where did the prisoners eat? Are they allowed out their cells? Is there a yard? Where do the guards live? Even when they do add areas to answer some of these questions, it's just lip service. While there are medical areas, it's all very samey. Most of it's just beds. Where's all the medical equipment? At best, we do get an operating room, but there's more to medicine than that. The cell block you start in, is that the standard cell block? Other than the maximum security prisoners, are all the prisoners here? It's stuff like this that stops the prison from having a history. It's not a functional place, it's a video game level. It strips the game of that underlying horror that works so well in the Dead Space games. The writing on the walls helps add to this feeling, but the Callisto Protocol rarely uses this, and when it does, it reuses the same graffiti. The shoot the tentacles writing is repeated like 10 minutes later. It's not an issue that games reuse assets, but it is an issue when they're used right next to each other. The worst offender is the don't make a sound writing. It's used 5 times. 4 of these are right next to each other. This is a rough layout of this area, and here is where you can find the graffiti. How did this happen? That's so lazy. The majority of the reused assets aren't this bad. There is usually a bit more of a gap between sightings, but it makes the game feel very repetitive, which is a shame as the areas aren't just copy pasted. I do wish the areas were a bit more unique and just better designed in the prison, but it didn't feel like I was just walking down the same hallway over and over again. But with this amount of reused graffiti, it does feel repetitive. This game is very linear, so doing this makes repeated assets so obvious. The linearity is fine, but every now and again, it's difficult to know which way is the right way to go and which way is off the main path. When in the Habitat Dome, you need to find a way to get into this room to get a code, and you've got 2 doors, oxygen processing or botanical harvesting. Like, which way do you go? On the way to medical, you're greeted with either maintenance or laundry. How do you figure out which way to go? This wouldn't be too much of an issue, but multiple times throughout the game, the way you came will no longer be open, so you can't always go back to search the other direction. Dead Space didn't do this great either, as it just gave you a glowing line to follow, but at least it was obvious when you went off the path. Something that both games don't do well are the puzzles. This is a gripe I have against most horror games. The puzzles suck. Most of them are just go find random item and use here and only here. Maybe you'll get a mini game to do, which can be done well, having to do them under pressure as an enemy hunts you, but even then, they're not difficult. You don't even get that in the Callisto Protocol. The only puzzles you get in the base game are to go find a fuse. It's purely fluff. I generally don't know why they bothered with this mechanic. There's nothing here to engage your brain, meaning there's no sense of achievement for solving, I don't know what else you'd call it, these sections. There's one bit that's used a bit better, as it gives you a chance to open up a room with loot in it, but all the other times are just to pad the runtime or shoehorn in another 2-head fight, because those were great. As we're on the topic of time wasting, might as well talk about what the game is iconic for. Part 3.5. I just need to vent. One thing I must give the game, it is gorgeous. This is one of the best looking games out there. Unfortunately, this comes with a downside as there are events and sliding sequences basically every 20 minutes. It's a proven technique in modern gaming to use these types of mechanics to hide loading screens with a small, simple environment and an animation it can play on loop. It's down to you whether you prefer this to a loading screen. Personally, I prefer these as it can make a game feel more fluid and streamlined, but when you constantly have these sections, it is an issue as it's not very engaging gameplay, is it? This would be an issue in any game, but especially in horror games. When you're in these sections, you're completely safe, so there's no tension. No matter how scary the rest of the game is, this takes you away from the fear. The game does try to keep the tension up with a few things. Bodies will get dragged off in front of you, or biophage will hit the grating, but you know you're safe. You can't aim your gun or anything. So again, it's all surface level. Nothing can hurt you here. This false sense of danger extends to when the game does have an enemy attack during these parts. Multiple times throughout the story, Jacob will be attacked by a biophage or something while in a shimmy or climbing section, and the game will then change to a cutscene with Jacob now moving of his own volition, so the player changes from the one in control, however slightly, to a viewer. I assume for some of these sections you still needed to hold down the left stick to keep Jacob moving, because the very first one has you having to hold down the stick. The sequence is way too long to be exciting, but yeah, you are slightly involved. The rest though, Jacob is in complete control. You have no choice in how Jacob survives these attacks, so you're not scared. The only time you lose control of Isaac is at the start and end of the game. Everything in between is your choice, so when Isaac is in danger, you're in danger. These cutscenes where Jacob enters and exits danger without the player having an input is meaningless in an interactive medium. The worst one is where you're both in control but also have no control. Stay with me. There's a section where you end up on a slip and slide and you can move left and right to dodge obstacles, but you can't control how fast Jacob goes, so when you fly up into the air, just going under these exposed gears, it's meant to make you clench and try to slow down, but that's not up to the player, so no matter what, you dodge it. It's cheating in a video game. There's no choice or consequence. It's just a film at this point. A lot of inspiration for this game came from horror films, and there's obviously nothing wrong with where a game or film or whatever gets its inspiration. Silent Hill was inspired by, among other things, Jacob's Ladder, with the imagery, setting and themes being similar, but changes how the fear is generated because it's a completely different medium. What works in one doesn't work in another. This is a fundamental flaw in the Callisto Protocol. A lot of how the game tries to generate fear is taken from how films generate fear and tension. A scene I spoke about earlier, when a biophage's eyes move when Jacob moves past it, shows this perfectly. Showing the player that they're in danger but not showing the character doesn't work because the player is in control. What they know is what the character knows, so they have to make the biophage invincible until it pops out. In an interview, Glenn Schofield discusses how horror films influence him, directly talking about this scene in Event Horizon where the lights are flickering and a character walks down a hallway, and when they've moved on, the lights come back on to show blood on the walls. This works in a film because the audience is a spectator, so you just have to sit there in the knowledge that the character is in danger, but they don't know. This builds tension perfectly in a medium where you're a spectator. As the player is a participant in a video game, showing them that they're in danger in the same way doesn't build fear. The start of the Lost chapter, you're thrown out of an airlock and your helmet doesn't open. It's very similar to this scene in The Martian, as both characters are sent flying, causing a malfunction with their helmets. However, the scene in The Martian is much more tense as this setup is much better in a film. Watching Mark struggle to tape up his helmet with the excellent sound design and countdown is genuinely tense.
Oxygen level 10%.
Having the control suddenly taken away from you to watch Jacob obviously survive because you can't do anything is not. I think I can prove that this game is too heavily inspired by films. The behind the scenes documentary I've spoken about, it also features people who've worked in horror, but almost exclusively, they're people who've worked on films. The only person that wasn't a part of the game they had who didn't work in films was Robert Kirkman, the creator of The Walking Dead and Invincible. No disrespect to these people, they clearly know what they're talking about, but how you generate fear in a film is completely different to how you generate fear in a video game. Other than the people who worked on the Callisto Protocol, no one had any experience in horror games. Or here, in this GIC talk, they show a list of the research they did, with it only containing 3 games out of a list of 13. I think this shows that the ideas for generating horror comes from the films, not games. There is one section in the game that's cinematic and is able to keep the player engaged. Falling from the roof of the prison, you have to control Jacob as he falls, dodging debris. This all feels very familiar, but I just can't think of where I've seen this before. It's not an amazing bit of gaming, but it's downright more fun and tense than when Jacob gets attacked in cutscenes. I also like how if you miss a QTE, it's not an instant fail, you get a few more chances to tear your arms off. As we're discussing the cutscenes, I should probably talk about the other stuff that happens in them. You get it? there's not a complete story. Horror games need a good hook to keep you going. It may surprise you to hear, but fear is an unpleasant emotion. So why would you put yourself in a situation where you experience said unpleasant emotion? To keep you going, most horror games start by setting up a mystery. Silent Hill 2 has you wondering where your wife is, or Resident Evil 7 has you wondering where your wife is, or Dead Space, which flips this on its head, as you're wondering where your girlfriend is. Think about the first 2 minutes of your favourite horror game. Is it setting up a mystery? Outlast opens with you opening an email about the messed up stuff happening at an asylum. Amnesia opens with a monologue about how you chose to forget and asking you to kill someone. The Callisto Protocol does an okay job setting up a mystery. What happened at Europa? Why are the terrorists attacking you specifically? What's happening at the prison, and why do you get arrested? This did interest me on my first playthrough, but all these questions are dropped until the very end of the game. There's no advancement in the plot until the last hour or so, when you get an exposition dump explaining everything. You can take out everything from the Aftermath chapter to the end of the Colony chapter and still have the same plot. Stop me if you've heard this before, it's all surface level. This is a big issue with the characters, to the point where calling them characters is very generous. All they talk about is the current issue you face. Locked door? Quick line about needing a guard code. A bridge has fallen? Hear about a platform underneath. Again, there's nothing wrong with this, but that's all they talk about. They're never given any real depth. The game has 3 characters it wants to explore: Jacob, the player character, Elias, a prisoner in Black Iron, and Danny, the head of a terrorist group, the Outer Way. We'll start with Elias. His sole job in this game is to give you a direction. He never does anything past this. Basically, all his dialogue can be summed up as, you need to do blank to move on. We never hear more about his character. The game never explores the reason behind his imprisonment, how he's changed as a person as time went on, or anything. We get some lip service to this, as he says he killed someone, but he's changed. How has he changed? Why did he kill someone? The game attempts to explore the themes of guilt and redemption, and being set in a prison is a great location for this, and having a reformed prisoner allows the game to explore these ideas, but it never does. This is especially disappointing, as there's a section of the game where you have Elias's diary or something playing as you travel through the sewer. This is a great opportunity to explore Elias's backstory, seeing him deal with his actions and guilt, but all they are is how to escape the sewer, nothing more.
Red pipe. Train's right down to it. Here's a pipe leads to tank 6. Just got a train and a tank.
The game also wants us to be distrustful of him as well, as Jacob questions why he doesn't tell us stuff, but he hasn't done anything that makes me suspicious of him, and then he dies after this anyway, so what's the point? His death as well has no impact whatsoever. Other than a quick line about Danny taking his core, he's not spoken about for the rest of the game. Danny gets a bit more characterization. Like I said, she's the head of the Outer Way. She was on Europa during a previous outbreak where she lost her sister, but again, none of this is expanded on. We get a brief comment on the Outer Way attacks, but we never hear why they're targeting the UJC, the company behind the outbreak, because they started their attacks before the Europa outbreak. I think. It's really poorly explained. From the little we do hear, they were already attacking the UJC, and as she's the leader, she was already a part of the Outer Way beforehand. Was she on Europa to investigate the secret UJC lab? Did she live there? It takes away that personal connection she could have with UJC, as it's never explained. Does she feel responsible for her sister's death as she brought her to Europa? We never know. Again, we sync with her core device, seeing her memories, but that's only used once, to show she lost someone on Europa, and there's not enough of a build-up to make this an interesting twist or revelation. This reveal does nothing to inform her motivations. It's also completely overshadowed by another reveal we get involving Jacob, but we'll get to that in a minute, as I want to quickly point out that the Outer Way is completely forgotten about after chapter 3. Wouldn't Danny want to contact them to get her off Callisto or something? As the dialogue is just go here, do that, the characters never talk to one another, they only talk to Jacob. After freeing Danny from her cell, there's a brief part of the game where both Elias and Danny are alive together. As she believes Jacob to be helping the UJC at this point, it'd be a good chance for her to open up to Elias, allowing both characters to actually get some personality as they bond with each other over the corruption of the UJC, but she disappears until conveniently turning up after his death. Also, there's an extended sequence when you're with Danny, first going to your crashed ship and then going to the roof of the prison to try to escape. This is an interesting section for 2 reasons. You don't get attacked for the whole sequence, and it's the longest you spend with another character in the whole game. This, of course, takes away all the tension, which isn't a bad thing. Other games have a similar sequence, sequence, taking away from the monsters and whatnot. It gives the player some breathing room, allowing the game to reset the player. Your fear level's lower and you begin to relax, so when the game raises the tension, you're more scared than you would have been if the game never took the tension away. Players get used to the atmosphere and enemies, so by changing the situation, taking away all those things, it can make the game scarier when you bring them back. Just the sight of this enemy scared me more than the entirety of the Callisto Protocol. As the game wasn't scary in the first place, the sequence doesn't really work at resetting the player, but also the game doesn't use this sequence at all to deepen Danny's character. We do get a change in Danny and Jacob's relationship, as she believes that Jacob has nothing to do with the outbreak, so you think this would lead her to opening up and us getting a better understanding of each of the characters. Once again though, all we talk about is the next step. Dead Space also had characters that are here to tell you where to go, but they argued with each other and were suspicious of one another. All this comes together when Kendra betrays you, as when you think back to her dialogue, she manipulates Isaac and the player to mistrust Hammond as she accuses him of withholding information from them, when in reality, she's been the one withholding information. The game shows what these people are like. These aren't the best written characters in gaming or anything, but there's enough here to keep me interested in their plight. The only thing that the game shows me about Danny is that she's an idiot. She sinks her core with one of the miners in a heavily infected area. She doesn't hear the two-head until it picks her up.
There's a pattern. Arcus, Black Iron, Europa. They're all connected. Watch out!
She runs out of the room she clearly needed to stay in and then easily gets infected. Furthermore, she only finds out that Jacob did smuggle the biophage virus right at the very end. The game just avoids these issues because I don't think you'd be able to reconcile these two if Danny found out earlier. I would like to comment on all their performances, but they don't get enough to do to comment on it. So instead, I'm going to show you a clip of when Karen Fukuhara got left hanging.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
The biggest issue with the characters is with Jacob himself. The game wants him to be this morally grey character that will do whatever he has to survive, but we never see him do anything morally grey. He does jettison the Outer Way, but that doesn't feel grey to me. They're a terrorist organisation that Jacob believes to be violent, so this feels more like a them or me situation. And yeah, he does smuggle the virus, but we're told this right at the end. It's telling, not showing that he's morally grey. He never fucks someone over to ensure his own survival or anything, except when it's a life or death situation. So when the game has the primary antagonist saying stuff like,
"You're not the innocent you claim to be. You've proven that you'll do just about anything to ensure your own survival."
it means nothing as he's done nothing. The DLC has this montage and the game repeats this dialogue, but it just shows the major deaths of the game, and the only one you could maybe blame Jacob for is Max. Even the developers can't show Jacob being a morally grey character. The only thing that makes Jacob grey is him being a smuggler. However, as the game holds back this information, using it a twist at the very end of the game, this being the reveal that overshadows Danny's sister, it keeps Jacob in denial for the whole game. It makes his character stagnant. There's no interesting developments or anything for him to do other than deny that he has anything to do with the outbreak. Isaac is also in denial about Nicole for the whole game, but there are other plot threads that the game explores to stop the game from feeling stagnant, whilst using hallucinations and other factors to keep the player in denial with Isaac, but also hinting to the player that something is up. Videos of her will play on random screens, and when you do see her, she's in the most random places, and conveniently turns up when you're screwed, talking about all sorts of weird stuff. That's not even considering the game spelling it out for you. In case you didn't know, the first letter of every chapter spells out Nicole is dead, showing that Isaac knew the whole time and didn't want to accept it. I thought the Callisto Protocol was going to do something similar, as there's Korean above the chapter titles, and stupidly, I thought there'd be some foreshadowing or something, but nope, all of them translate to the Callisto Protocol. I really don't know why they put that in there. As the game keeps Jacob in denial with nothing else to do, the game can't explore him or the themes of the game. Max, your co-pilot who dies in the crash, is used to symbolise Jacob's guilt, but the game does nothing with this. We see Max 4 times as a hallucination, only once does it work as a way to show Jacob's guilt. After Danny takes you to your crashed ship and Jacob lies about his involvement with Europa, Max appears behind her. The game really should have used this more throughout, letting the player begin to link Max to Jacob's denial. It actually does do this from the start, with Max's last word linking his death to Jacob's guilt over smuggling.
Why didn't you listen?
Two of the other times we see Max are just cheap jump scares. Briefly seeing him is not exploring Jacob's guilt, it's just a loud noise that annoys me. If Max had been put in the levels, watching us from a distance, or they could have used the pink box you see during the first hallucination, as you have to interact with it before Max pops out, do you think the game would keep reminding us of either one of them to tell the player that there's something about Jacob that we don't know? You can sort of see the box during this hallucination, but it doesn't really appear properly until the end with the reveal. It's not, so that's what the box represents. It's, oh yeah, there was a box earlier. Nicole in Dead Space 2 plays the same role for Isaac, a hallucination representing his guilt, and she is constantly turning up, talking to you and messing with the player, as well as with Isaac's head. She is a constant presence, never letting Isaac, and therefore the player, forget his past actions and guilt, while Max turns up so infrequently that the player can completely forget about him and anything he might represent. It's a shame as well, as the final hallucination sequence is the best, basically by default. Jacob actually gets to do something, letting him speedrun his character arc.
What we got here is none of our business. I could have stopped this, but I didn't.
The reveal itself falls flat on its face. There's no real build up to it, other than at the very start, with the opening cutscene with Jacob and Max arguing about something shady they're doing, and the quick jump scare with Max I spoke about a minute ago. That's it. This really should have been a mid-game twist, with the second half focusing on Jacob's guilt and responsibility. The twist itself doesn't make much sense to me either. He either knew the whole time that he was indirectly responsible and in so much denial that even after seeing the tubes here didn't knock him out of it, and we have to wait another hour for him to finally see the light, or he didn't know that the tubes caused the whole thing, and after seeing them, it took him however long to make the connection, in which case, he really shouldn't have a sense of guilt yet, and the whole Max stuff makes no sense. This scene really should have been when the reveal happened. Seeing this stuff should have either knocked Jacob out of his denial, or let him discover that he's partly responsible. He does say,
God.
So clearly Jacob has realised something, but we have to wait another hour to find out what. This flashback should have been played right here. In a later conversation, he's still denying that he has anything to do with Europa, so either he's the biggest idiot in gaming that can't put two and two together, or is in such denial that nothing is pulling him out of it until the almighty plot demands it. It's a cool idea that you get to go into Danny's memories, but in the greater context of the game, it feels kind of forced. It's disappointing that this is the only time this idea is used. If, instead of ripping out someone's core device to get a code or audio log, you synced with their core, having to experience their last moments in order to get the code or whatever, the game could also mess with the player, making it difficult to tell what's real and what's a memory. It's just strange to me that the game has a cool idea and only uses it once. As it stands, the audio logs are just bad, but don't really add anything. The Dead Space games are really helped by the audio logs. They help paint a picture of the lives ruined by the necromorphs. As you explore the Ishimura, you'll find audio logs from an engineer who first tries to fix the problems you're currently dealing with, before giving up and going in search of his wife. As you continue to explore the ship, you'll pick up his trail every now and again as he searches hydroponics, where his wife worked, then the bridge, and the mining deck as he attempted to sort out an SOS beacon. Finally, as you advance in the story, you'll catch up to him, having been caught by one of the cultists, and he and his wife are sacrificed to the necromorphs. It's tragic and shows that the necromorphs aren't the only monsters on this ship. The logs also help flesh out the wider world. You can find text logs that explain why humans have resorted to planet cracking, what unitology is, the infighting between unitologists. It makes the world feel larger than what the player sees. The Callisto Protocol only talks about the outbreak, whether it's the few that are set before the outbreak, that only discuss the warden and him setting up the protocol, and the rest are set during the outbreak. It makes the universe feel very small, as only the outbreak is happening in it. Even the ones that are supposed to add something to the lore don't. There are two secret rooms in the game, hinting at the secret society behind the outbreak, each with an audio log that tells you nothing of use. One of these is in the chapter below, so this group has been around for a while, and we hear in one of the audio logs someone referring to them as the Circle, with them behind the warden, but that's it. They don't explain anything about the Circle, or what their motivations are, or anything interesting. All they do is tell you that they exist. A great part about the unitologists is that you can kind of see a fucked up reasoning to their belief. The necromorphs are an answer to one of humanity's big questions: what happens after death? As they are literally created from corpses. It's got something that other faiths don't have, proof of its life after death, so you could conceivably understand why someone would believe in this. You also see some unitologists turn away from their faith as they see the necromorphs as what they are, which is nightmare fuel. It's much more believable as seeing this confirms people's faith while also turning others away. The Circle only gets this vague motivation at the end of the game.
Our future lies out there. Our destiny. But we were not built for life in space. This fragile shell holds us back. We have to evolve.
That makes no sense. You are aware you're not on Earth anymore, right? You've already survived space to get here. You might be thinking that as they keep repeating this motto, it might mean something, right? But it's Latin for solitary man or solitary survivor or something, which makes no sense in this story, but seems to be a remnant from when this was meant to be part of the PUBG universe. I know nothing about PUBG, so I won't speculate on that, but if you're interested, I've linked a Reddit post by Chasing Wagons about the PUBG connection to the story. The antagonists as well suck. Looking at the Warden first, he's not personal enough to Jacob and the player to be an effective antagonist. While we know who he is through pre-recorded messages and a few audio logs that mention him, you don't actually interact with him until halfway through the game, where he does shoot down a ship coming to get you, but then you don't speak to him again until the very end of the game. There's a similar character in Dead Space 2 with Tideman, the man in charge of the Sprawl, who's also responsible for the outbreak, but he continuously turns up to throw obstacles in your way. The Warden, other than one time, doesn't acknowledge your existence. He's not a constant threat. Captain Ferris is more personal to Jacob and the player, as he's the guy who arrests you, and you actually interact with him at some points in the story. I do like Sam Witwer's performance here.
What'd you do? Huh? You can tell me. Are you different? Are you special?
It's just a shame that's all he gets to do, as after he gets tackled through a window, you briefly see him when he sends you out of the prison. He appears at the end of the Colony chapter and you get a boss fight, and you face him again as the final boss as he turns into a Resident Evil monster. There's just nothing there to make him interesting. This story section has been the hardest bit to write, as the Callisto Protocol does have the foundation here to build an interesting story. The opening cutscene does do a good job of setting up a story. The characters are well chosen to look at guilt and redemption. The location is interesting and could lead to a really good, intense atmosphere, but the game never builds on this foundation. These things are here, but are rarely, if ever, used. Throughout the game, you'll find Warden Cole's automated messages, where most just beat the theme over your head.
Choice. Every choice in your life has led you here.
You get it? Your choices have consequences, but a few are well written.
Escape from this prison, from yourself. Neither is possible. The only path towards true freedom is found within.
Like, that is interesting writing that deals with the theme and Jacob as a character. That's what's really frustrating about this story. There are glimpses of something good. If the story was crap, I could just walk away with no issue without having to rewrite this section 4 or 5 times. That there's something here, but it never goes anywhere. It's so disappointing, which awkwardly segues us to the ending. After defeating the final boss and curing Danny, you run off to the Warden's escape pods and find only one left, so Jacob sacrifices himself and sends Danny off with evidence of what's happened, and it just rings hollow. Because the game never explores Jacob's guilt, his redemption isn't earned, and him sacrificing himself is just stupid. If we'd learned a little bit more about the Circle and dealt with Jacob's actions more throughout the game, it'd be a much better ending with him leaving Black Iron Prison with the goal to bring down the Circle. That would be his redemption after helping them. Or even if they really wanted him to sacrifice himself, having him actually deal with his past and be a real character, it would make his death actually mean something, as he sacrifices himself to save someone his choices have harmed and help bring the people responsible to justice. As it stands, yeah, Danny has evidence, but at best she could bring down the Warden and the UJC, but that's it. Who were the other members of the Circle, and what other companies or even governments do they control? We'll never know. And now we see why this game ends the way it does. After sending Danny off, saying we deserve to stay here, just before the credits start, you get a scene with Dr. Marla contacting you.
Jacob, there might be a way out after all.
Reactor 4 temporary status activated.
But I'm going to need your help.
Part 5. Please give us more money. This is my biggest hatred in games, when they cut off the last few hours or so and make it DLC. We know you've paid for this game, but give us more money to finish it. Now, in all honesty, I didn't pay for the base game. I got it for free when it was on PlayStation Extra, but I did have to buy the DLC, and I'm pissed off about that. The biggest screw you though is after completing the game and going through the credits, the game immediately puts you on the downloadable content option in the main menu, not New Game or New Game Plus, the Give Us Money option. Now, in defense of the DLC, I do think it fixes some of the issues I have with the base game. The grip is better utilized as there isn't as many spike walls. Instead, the game has these saw blades or whatever that you can use to cut up enemies. It's more engaging and fun to use these than pick up enemies and throw them in the general direction of spikes. There are also a few honest to god puzzles added. They're not great, but they're here. It also deals with Jacob's guilt, not well, but at least it tries to. And I do like a few of the insanity sequences, like being able to make Jacob put his hand in a toilet. and how it teases a two-head fight, except for this flash of red it does, which would be fine if it did it infrequently, but there are times where the game is just trying to give me a seizure. It does also try to make the vent sequences more interesting as it adds these moving fans you have to avoid. Again, they miss the point as it takes no skill, just pushing the joystick in the other direction, so these vent sequences just take longer now. So while I do like a few of these changes to the gameplay, I would never have paid for the DLC if it wasn't for this video, but if you did enjoy the game and wanted to finish the story, the game spits in your face. Starting with a recap of the game and finishing with Ferris yelling at you, Jacob wakes up in the middle of nowhere with no explanation other than amnesia. The game thankfully adds a much needed new enemy type and has a good build up to it. In Marla's lab, you'll see where it was experimented on and here.
Avoid it if you can. Fight it if you must.
You then have to hide from it and see more of them in a factory where one grabs you and Jacob breaks his baton to escape. It just broke your main weapon, and that was a much weaker one than the ones you're going to face. It's so bad that Marla sends you off to find a much more powerful weapon to take these things on. I do wish the game did a bit more with the no melee section, because after a quick bit of stealth, you then get a much more powerful weapon that can one-shot standard biophage. It'd be a great way to raise the tension as you have to adapt to not having your primary weapon anymore. This is a much more interesting way of building up to these enemies and makes them scary, except this is a lie. I've lied to you. Between the sneak section and seeing them in the lab, one of them attacks you and you have to kill it, and it's the exact same as every other enemy. Dodge, then hit. So all this build up here is pointless as you've already killed one, and when getting a more powerful weapon is not finally I can fight back, it's finally I can kill them quicker than before. Also, as the standard robots can instantly kill you, these biobots are a step down to them as they can't one-shot you anymore. What was the point of experimenting on them? The story for this DLC is getting from Marla's lab to a hangar while collecting data drives of Marla's work along the way. The story is where it really lets down fans of the Callisto Protocol, as chances are you're playing this to see how Jacob escapes the prison, as the game ends with Mola saying they can still escape, and the DLC does try to deal with Jacob's guilt, so it could end with Jacob escaping with proof to take down the Circle, setting up a sequel, like how the game should have ended, but whatever. The problem is that in a twist, it all takes place in Jacob's mind and he dies at the end, so dealing with Jacob's guilt is pointless as he dies immediately after. The data drives you pick up are to do with Marla using the link you have with Danny's core, so it's her uploading them to your head so Danny has them. These should have actually explained the Circle or given some greater image of the universe and whatnot, but once again, the audio logs here are all surface level. The only thing they actually add is that the biobots must exist in the actual world as she talks about them in the data drives, but otherwise it's all stuff we already know. All the questions the main game ended with aren't answered here. How did Ferris come back? What was the point of the Circle? All you get is a terrible final boss, which is just another two-head fight with more undodgeable attacks, and as you can't upgrade the hammer, you will always take damage from these attacks, leading to some absolutely bullshit deaths. It generally feels like they rewrote this to end the story due to the reviews and reception of the base game. They also added a little end credit scene as well. It's fine.
Hey, where'd everybody go?
Although it does ruin the tone of the ending, as it's just the actor for Jacob breaking the fourth wall and wondering where his legs are. Would you be surprised if I told you that they screwed this up as well? As it's not after the credits, it's after 3.5 minutes of the Striking Distance Studios logo. So congratulations, you've associated your logo with me being bored and pissed off. The Callisto Protocol is a terrible and disappointing game, but whose fault is that? Throughout this video, I've shown videos and images of the creatives behind the game, but not all of this is their fault. Glenn Schofield, after release of this game, left Striking Distance Studios and has gone on in interviews to pass the blame onto Krafton, the parent company of Striking Distance Studios. They reportedly forced the game's release 3 months earlier than anticipated. Not only did this cause the obvious issues with the game, but also caused 2 bosses to be cut, as well as 4 enemy types. Clearly, Krafton is building a terrible reputation for themselves, and is probably why so much of the game is cut off and put behind a paywall. With this cut time, it would have allowed them to create a better overall game. Maybe most of my complaints in this video would be null and void, but I don't think it's all Krafton's fault. The ideas and mechanics that are in this game are those of the developers. These aren't half-baked or unfinished, these are what were intended for the game to be, and they're awful. This is one of the worst combat systems I've ever played. The grip is something that should never have been included, so with that extra time, maybe they could have made a generally scary experience, but I doubt it. I've seen other people, when more positively reviewing this game, say you shouldn't look at it as a survival horror game, but instead as an action game with horror elements. If that's how you see this game and enjoy it because of that, that's great. But the team behind Callisto wanted this to be a survival horror game, and I think intention matters. The trailers show a scary game, all the game descriptions I could find label it as a survival horror, interviews with the developers stating how scary the enemies in game was going to be. Hell, the behind the scenes videos are literally called Mastering Horror. They wanted to make the next big terrifying survival horror, and even if they had the extra time and whatever else they needed, I don't think they would have succeeded because of the base ideas this game was built on. While reportedly the game did sell well, I doubt we'll see a sequel to the Callisto Protocol. With the poor reception, Glenn Schofield leaving, and the DLC murdering the main character, it seems unlikely that we'll be rejoining Danny anytime soon. But if they ever do, rest assured, I will probably never play it, as I've already wasted enough of my finite existence on this earth thinking and talking about this game. Although, while researching, aka googling Callisto Protocol 2, I discovered they released a spin-off, a roguelike set in Black Iron, but it seems to have good reviews. And strangely enough, I could see the setting and enemies work in a roguelike. It is kind of funny though that the one thing everyone praised the game for, the graphics, have been dropped for a Borderlands ripoff. I think the main reason I'm so annoyed by this game is that I'm a huge fan of Dead Space. 1 and 2 will permanently remain in my favourite games of all time, and seeing the lead up to this game use that love to try to sell me a crappy game filled with microtransactions and an ending designed to make you pay more just to finish the story, which ended up being an insult to the dozens of fans that wanted to see how it all ended, it just leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. Thankfully though, something better came along, released just a month after the Callisto Protocol, which, in all honesty, was a bit of a screw you to Glenn Schofield. The Dead Space remake. I think this is one of the best remakes out there. It changed just enough for old fans of the original, but kept what made it special for newbies to the franchise. They even got Gunnar Wright to reprise his role as Isaac, a strangely rare thing in horror remakes. I do think I prefer the original though, but that's probably just nostalgia talking. If you prefer the remake, I could not argue with you. If the idea for a horror game set in space with a focus on tearing enemies apart sounds interesting to you, play this, and do it quickly as you're going to want to have it finished before they release the Dead Space 2 remake. Thank you so much for watching. Sorry this took me longer than I wanted. I originally wanted this out in October, but life gets in the way and all that. I've had this game in my head for years now. The first time I played it, I whinged at my wife for weeks about it. So I'm glad I can finally get it all out there and move on with my life, I hope. If you enjoyed this, make sure to check out my Red Dead Redemption 2 video. I don't know what I'll cover next. I've got a few ideas, but nothing concrete at the moment. All I can say though is, I hope to have it out quicker than this one.